So Road to UFC episode number 2 is going to be taking place on Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. If you guys are unfamiliar with the Road to UFC, it is kind of like the Contender Series, but for Asia and Oceania, where fighters compete in a tournament instead of one-off bouts to potentially get a UFC contract. Now, the bouts are going to be taking place over Thursday and Friday. This episode number 2 in particular will be broadcast at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Thursday this week on the UFC Fight Pass website. And if you do have UFC Fight Pass, you will of course be able to watch it. Now, as for the other episodes, I will be predicting those on my channel as well. My episode 1 video is of course already out at this point. And if you guys haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel and you won't miss any of my other Road to UFC predictions, as well as my Contender Series predictions that I will be doing later on this year in only a couple of months when the Road to UFC does begin. I also do predict the PFL, I do LFA on occasion, and of course I do every single UFC card on this channel as well. So if you're interested in those, please do subscribe to my channel, because I'm getting pretty close to 10,000 subscribers, and that is a very exciting milestone, I will be honest. So I do appreciate everyone who has subscribed already, and I do appreciate everyone for their support over the last few weeks, because it has been a pretty stressful time for me. I had my exams, my upload schedule was, it was all over the place, but everyone was still very supportive, and I do appreciate that. I don't want to spend too much time on the intro, because I did manage to record 18 minutes for episode number 1 over 5 fights, and I want to kind of stay, I guess, around that mark, maybe shorter. So let's get into the first one now. This is a bonus fight between two fighters that aren't in the tournament. The winner of this fight could potentially be getting signed straight up to the UFC, like it was a Dana White's Contender Series matchup. It's between Aziz Khaydarov and Mansher Khera. Aziz Khaydarov is from Tajikistan, and he has been on an absolute tear ever since he moved to China. He did start off with a pretty bad 2-5 record, but since then he's gone on a big win streak, and he has kind of just developed a massive win streak. I will be honest, he hasn't beaten anyone super notable. I guess recently he got a big win over Ali Malatbieki, and then before that he did beat Ren Yue, and Ren Yue is going to be on the tournament in a later episode as well. So that's a pretty good win to have, and especially in the way that he did it, because Aziz Khaydarov, he does have a very well-rounded skill set. You would think that he's a wrestler, and honestly, he is a wrestler. That's what he does, but he does still have a very well-rounded skill set. He's got very good striking, quite dynamic actually. I think his hands are very good, and he does have a lot of kicks in his arsenal too. But the thing about Khaydarov is when he does get his takedowns, he looks good doing it. He was able to control and dominate Ren Yue to get a very quick submission win, and he was able to use his well-rounded skill set with the strikes and the wrestling to defeat Ali Malatbieki, who was a pretty solid guy too. However, looking at this matchup in particular, I think you need to look at his loss to Balajin, because Balajin is a wrestler. He has kind of like the local Chinese wrestling style, which is kind of like Greco-Roman, but a little bit different. And in that matchup, Balajin was able to take down Aziz Khaydarov with really not that much resistance at times, and I don't really love seeing that when I look at the matchup between Mansher Khera. Mansher Khera is a former world champion in no-gi BJJ. I believe he won it in 2014 was when he won it, so a while ago now, but he has been able to transfer those skills very well to MMA. He's 8-0 now as a pro. He just recently become the Fury FC champion at lightweight, and he's been pretty dominant throughout his entire career. He did beat Devin Dixon, who's a pretty rangy striker with a bit of power in his hands. And he did it by just taking Devin Dixon down without really all that much without really any resistance. Now, that is Mansher Khera's game. Mansher Khera does not want to strike. And in fact, Aziz Khaydarov is going to have a very significant striking advantage out of these two guys, because when you kind of think of the term crotch sniffer, that is how Khera fights. Khera will get on his knees, and he will just try and shoot for takedowns no matter what. If the fight is on the feet, Mansher Khera is trying to get the fight down. That is kind of the amount of time that is spent striking of Mansher Khera. I watched Mansher Khera's fights, most of the more recent ones. I really didn't see any striking from him in those matchups at all. He's just shooting for takedowns against Devin Dixon. Devin Dixon was trying to throw a lot of punches. Mansher Khera would time takedowns very well on Dixon. Dixon would throw a punch, and then Khera would duck under, grab the hips, and just take him down. And after that, he would be able to get the control, get some grappling going, some submission attempts going as well, of course. and eventually he ended up in full mount position, and he ended up getting the ground and pound TKO against Devin Dixon. Hector Sainz, same sort of story, except he only took one takedown to get that fight done. As soon as he got the fight down to the ground, he took the back pretty quickly, and from there on out, it was over. You know, you've got a former world BJJ champion on your back in the first round. The fight's over from there, let's be honest. Now, I do not like the fact that Khaydarov was getting dominated so much in that matchup with the wrestling. Now, that was 4 years ago. He could have maybe improved since then, but just the fact that Khaydarov was getting taken down so quickly and so easily, I think that just given the fact that Mansher Khera's one main thing in his game, which is grappling, and one thing that he's very, very good at, which is wrestling, and especially timing takedowns well, I think that that's not a very good recipe for Khaydarov's sort of skill set. Now, it is worth noting as well, we just saw Balajin get out wrestled by Keisuke Sasu as well. So we've seen Balajin lose at what he is best at. So I think that kind of just putting 2 and 2 together here, I think that Khera has a pretty good chance of getting a takedown over Khaydarov and getting that grappling going. And now Rio Turto fights against Aaron Toe. I think that Aaron Toe moving down to flyweight is actually going to be a very good thing for his career. I did say when I broke down his fight on the Contender Series that I think that he was too small for bantamweight, and I think that did show on the Contender Series. I don't think fully showed on the Contender Series. I think it was actually previous fights, especially against Paul Loga, where Toe's size disadvantage did really show. But I did actually pick Aaron Toe to lose against Elijah Smith, and I know a lot of people called me a traitor for that, because Aaron Toe does have a pretty diehard fan base here in New Zealand, of course, and you know, me being from New Zealand and me being moldy as well with Aaron Toe, it was pretty hard to kind of turn my back on my boy. But you know, you've got to put biases aside and pick who I did think was going to win. And honestly, I did not think it was the best stylistic matchup for Toe. But I think that he dug deep. I think he looked good. He looked very good in round number 3. Showed good takedown defense overall as well. And showed pretty solid striking too. Aaron Toe, if you guys are unfamiliar, fights exactly like Dan Hooker. He used to train at Dan Hooker's gym. I think he's now moved to CKB. You guys know how Dan Hooker fights. He has his hand out, one hand outstretched, one hand pretty close, and he just walks forward and pushes forward. Aaron Toe, sorry, I just hit my mic. Aaron Toe does the exact same thing. He will pressure forward with one hand pretty well extended, one hand pretty well back, and he will look to counter strike. He doesn't really initiate all that much striking. He wants to get counters going, and he does kind of rely on getting hit to throw back, especially in that matchup against Paul Loga, I want to mention again. Rio Turto is like one of the more confusing fighters I've ever watched before, because I can't tell multiple things about him. I can't tell if he's really good at wrestling, or if people in Indonesia just are nowhere near as good at wrestling as him. And I think my answer to that comes in the Wei King Yang fight, because I do not believe he won this matchup. You know, Rio Turto looked good in round number 1, got takedowns, and then Yang just really took over in rounds 2 and 3 when Turto completely gassed out, and somehow Turto still got the decision win. I strongly believe that Yang won this matchup. I think a lot of people think that Yang won this matchup. I think even the Indonesian fans thought that Yang won this matchup based on the YouTube comments, and shout out to One Pride MMA. All of these fights are on YouTube, man, and they've got a lot of subscribers, 900,000 subscribers for an Indonesian MMA YouTube channel. That just tells you, man, Jika Saragi really put Indonesian MMA on the map. And then aside from that, I think Indonesian MMA in general is just getting very popular. So we could potentially see more prospects come out of Indonesia into the UFC that is not Jika Saragi. But unfortunately for Rio Turto, just based on the fact that I did not see him have very good cardio against Yang really at all. And then in the other fights that I was watching, he showed really crazy one-punch KO power against Jeremiah Sirigar. But that was just with a massive overhand right that, you know, wasn't really well set up or anything. I think Turto's got a lot of promise. You know, his wrestling looks really solid for the Indonesian MMA level. But I do believe that Toe can keep the fight on the feet. And as long as Toe just, I guess, like survives the first round, because Turto's dangerous in round 1, Turto is going to gas. And I think in the second or the third round, Toe is going to be able to land something big and knock him out. So I'm going to go Toe by knockout in round 2 or 3. And now we have Jin Aoi taking on Chang Min Yoon. I'm sorry, that's just how I assume his surname is pronounced. Now, Jin Aoi is a very interesting fighter to watch. I actually watched a lot of his fights, because it started out by watching the first fight that came up when I searched his name. If you guys want to know some little tips, search up his name in Japanese or just any of these fighters' names in their native language, you will find them a lot easier. But Jin Aoi, the first fight that I watched of his was his matchup against Kotetsu Boku, and he spent a lot of this fight just chasing Boku down and throwing combinations and leaving his chin way up in the air. And honestly, he didn't really land anything of significance outside of the first round. And then after that, I started to do a little bit more of a deep dive of him, and I tried to watch the more recent fights that I possibly could watch. And what I did watch was pretty much all of these fights here of his win streak. And he does fight the same way in every single one of them, and it's very odd to me. He's really one of the first fighters that I've seen, especially in the male divisions, that wins fights by not really landing anything. He throws a lot of volume, but he has terrible striking accuracy, man. I think that's kind of why he's got a lot of close decision wins, as well as a lot of knockout wins, because he just throws volume out there, and sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. It's almost like he just throws strikes to throw them without actually intending on landing the strike, because, as I said, he's got close decisions and he's got knockout wins. It's a very odd sort of style to watch and try and understand. However, I will say some of his highlights are pretty sick. Like, he's got a flying knee KO here, which is sick. But this was a brutal knockout. And honestly, one of the most brutal knockouts I watched while doing tape for the Road to UFC, where it's a soccer kick KO. So you can imagine how bad it is, right? However, this is just not any soccer kick KO that I have seen. He had Chang Min Yoon pretty well rocked on his knees up against the cage, pretty much knocked out. And he's landed those little kind of short punches, short uppercuts, as a lot of fighters do when they do try and get a close finish up against the cage. But, you know, Jin, he just decided, you know what, I'm not going to knock this guy out with these little shovel hooks. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to kick him in the head. So what he does is he stands up, he soccer kicks him in the head. That doesn't knock him out. He stands up and he soccer kicks him in the head. That knocks him out cold, but the ref doesn't step in fast enough, so he lands a third soccer kick to a brutally knocked out Chang Min Yoon, and one of the more brutal KOs I've seen recently, I will be honest. Not one of the most brutal KOs I've ever seen. I still think that kind of does go to Joanderson Brito's knockout win over Chepe Mariscal. That's definitely the most brutal KO I've ever seen, but yeah, this is up there. This is probably the most brutal KO I've watched by doing tape in the year of 2025. I'll say that much. If you want to see a sick KO, watch that. But I've been yapping for too long about Jin Aoi. Let's talk about Chang Min Yoon. Chang Min Yoon's interesting to me because he took a very long period of time off since he fought for one championship, and then he fought for the Korean Zombies promotion. I'm not too sure if this is the case, but I'm going to assume this is when he did his mandatory military service. But to talk about Chang Min Yoon, he looked really good fighting for one championship, man. Like, he did have a 7-2 record fighting for them, and he had some pretty top competition. He fought against Kai Tang, who's a very, very good fighter from China for that promotion. And then he looked very solid, I thought, against Keanu Suba, where he just boxed him up for the most part, landed a lot of very good boxing combinations on the counter strikes, which I think is key for this matchup when you're fighting a guy that's going to throw volume and miss a lot. And then, I just hit my mic again, I'm sorry. And then he come out of nowhere again, like after a bit of time off, against Chansu Park. This is the fight which Dana White was actually in attendance of, and a couple of fighters from South Korea actually got signed straight to the UFC from the show. But Chansu Park versus Chang Min Yoon, no idea how this is a draw. Genuinely no idea how this is a draw. There was not a 10-8 round, and there was not a point deduction. I strongly believe that one of the judges gave a very rare 10-10 round in round number 1, because it come down to Chang Min Yoon, I believe, won round 2, and I think Chansu Park won round 3. So I think a judge must have given a 10-10 in round number 1, which is kind of interesting, because I strongly don't think that there was a 10-8 round in there. So if you can speak Korean and you can tell me what those judges' scorecards were, please let me know in the comments. I would appreciate just kind of knowing for sure what that judge was thinking. There was not a 10-8 round in that fight. But Chang Min Yoon in that fight, I think he did look a little bit slower. He looked a little bit worse than he did in these one championship fights. However, the counter boxing was still there. The wrestling was still there as well, which could be key for Jin, because we haven't really seen Jin deal with a wrestler all that much. So I think as long as Chang Min Yoon can kind of just land his counter strikes and land his strikes in general, and maybe get some takedowns, I think he's going to look pretty good. I'm kind of just noticing the time here. I've burned a lot of time talking about these guys. I'm sorry. It's just, you use up a lot of time when you have to introduce fighters, you know, because I'm sure a lot of the audience here will not be super familiar with these guys. So I've got to break down every single part of them. Agulali versus Mridul Saikia. This is a very good matchup for Agulali. Agulali, His one fight that he lost was when he was 17 years old. This guy is 20. He made his professional MMA debut at the age of 15 years old. How insane is that? And he didn't really just beat anyone. Wang Shoshang actually has found a lot of success in his own professional career. You know, he was the champion of JCK and he beat Agulali a couple of times. So this is kind of a nuts win to have on your record. It's aged very well. But Agulali, from what I've seen from him, he doesn't really strike all that much. He just wants to wrestle. And he does get his takedowns pretty easily. He was able to take down, not this guy, he was able to take down Murad Kurbanov very easily. And Kurbanov was trying to take down Agulali, and Agulali showed solid takedown defense to avoid that situation in that one. And then against Rufino Mante, this was a mismatch, let's be honest. Agulali, we did see some striking from him, but he just dominated the wrestling once he got the fight down to the ground. Mridul Saikia is interesting because he does look like a very good fighter from India. But the problem is, I just don't believe that the guys that he's been fighting on the Indian regional scene or thereabouts are as strong as the guys that Agulali has been fighting on the Chinese regional scene, or kind of just the Asian regional scene, as this was in Canggu. I believe that was in Canggu. Is that in Bali? Anyway, Mridul Saikia, I don't like his striking. I don't think he's dangerous on the feet. He's very good if he can get top control, but the problem is he did fight one of his best opponents in Himanshu Kaushik, and he couldn't really take him down. And on the feet, as I said, he just doesn't really have that much danger on the feet. And I was able to watch quite a few of his fights because, once again, MMA in India is kind of popping right now. And there are a lot of these kind of like Indian fan pages that were reposting all of his fights. So I was able to watch a lot of them. I was able to watch his fight against Kaushik, and then it was his fight against Abhilash Raut I was able to watch. And there was another one I watched too. I watched another one. I watched the third one. These names are not making sense. I believe it was this one. It was definitely that one. So it was definitely that one. And in all of these fights, he just doesn't have any danger on the feet at all. But once he gets the fight down to the ground, he does have very good top control. Against Chauhan, it looked like Chauhan didn't really know what he was doing. He got this choke in round 1 against Raut. You know, kind of sort of same thing. He just controlled for a lot and then eventually got the choke in round 2 against Kaushik. Kaushik wasn't that good in the first place, and then Kaushik attempted a takedown in the third round when he was tired and he got the guillotine. Just come on what I'm saying, I think Agulali is the better striker out of these two guys. He's going to be the bigger fighter out of these two guys. This is at 125, right? Yeah, Saikia is a very small guy for 125 in general. And I think Agulali's the better wrestler. So honestly, I think kind of overall, I think Agulali's going to get it done. I think he's going to get the takedown. I think he's going to get a finish pretty quickly in the first round, whether by sub or by ground and pound. And now we have Lee Kaiwen taking on Dong Hyun Seo. And honestly, I have to give it up to the matchmakers for this one because, oh my goodness, is this a good fight? This is unbelievably good matchmaking. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do it justice. And I just really hope it's a good fight, because I'm going to just gas this up like none other. Lee Kaiwen is my boy. You guys know I love Lee Kaiwen. He follows me on Instagram. Me and him, we're tight. You know what I mean? I messaged him about the road to UFC a few weeks ago. He said he's on it. And guess what? He's on it. He's here. Anyways, Lee Kaiwen, kind of an interesting fighter because he was on one championship and he was dominant, man. He was dominant in the way that when he won by KO. And he was rumored to be signing to the UFC. And then he lost to D'Andrade and he kind of lost that opportunity, but he come back against Liu Kai, and he was the Lee Kaiwen of old, you know, when he went out there against Liu Kai and just smoked him in 71 seconds. And then he fought Kuyakanda, and this was a really bad fight. You know, he was attempting takedowns, he was avoiding striking with him, and he said that the reason why he did that was because it was a big opportunity, he didn't want to lose. And then he fought against Yijia, and Yijia is one of his best friends, so it was kind of tough. So I know I'm making excuses for him, but Lee Kaiwen's got a wrestling background, a very good wrestler, in general. And, but on the feet, man, if you guys know who Lee Kaiwen is, he just bombs away on the feet. Like, he's going to stand in the pocket, and he's just going to throw hooks. He's going to throw down. I actually picked Lee Kaiwen to win the entire thing in 2023, and although it didn't quite end up happening, it wasn't a bad pick because he did make it to the finals. Dong Hyun Seo fights in the same way, man. This guy has unbelievable power in his hands. Like, he was landing jabs on Do Gyum Lee that was rocking Lee. And I believe it was another matchup that actually went the distance that I was able to watch of his as well. I'm pretty confident it was this one against Karamoto. And then I watched his loss to Jae-Hyun Park as well. But against these more recent opponents where he's a little bit better, when this guy lands, he's got crazy power. Like, he was rocking Do Kyung Lee with jabs. Unbelievable power in his hands, man. Like, this guy, when he lands clean, he's gonna land big. So I'm really excited to see this matchup. It's two guys with crazy power in the hands. It's two guys that have just crazy ability to land big. The problem with Dong Hyun Soo is I have seen him knocked out before. I saw him knocked out by Jae-Hoon Park. He's been knocked out before in his MMA debut, professional MMA debut. So you got to worry a little bit potentially about the chin. But the thing is, I mean, Lee Kaiwen's been knocked out too. So I think this is going to be a situation, man, where seriously, these guys are just going to throw down. And whoever lands big is going to find a lot of success. The thing about Lee Kaiwen, though, is he does have that wrestling background, a very high-level, national-level Chinese wrestling background. So if he wants to lean on that, I don't think that's a bad idea. I will be honest, because, I mean, this is going to be a big matchup between two guys that land big. If I haven't said it already, I'll say it again. Two powerful punches. I'm going to pick Lee Kaiwen, though. I think that Lee Kaiwen, if he does kind of just bite down on his mouth guard and throw big, I think he can land more often than Dong Hyun Soo. And I think that he's beaten the better competition just kind of throughout the entire course of his career, including his one championship run. And although this fight is really boring, one of the worst fights you will ever see, at least he showed that he is willing to wrestle still at this point in his career. I'm going to go with Lee Kaiwen. I think he gets it done by knockout. But he could win a decision if he gets the wrestling going. Let me know what you think in the comments below. 21 minutes. I'll see you guys in the next one.